It's pretty obvious that most chefs are going to be cooking better than most home cooks. They have hundreds, if not thousands of hours of professional experience and training that the other guys just don't. Having said that, there are a ton of methods that home cooks can steal from chefs to instantly make them better cooks. And I believe I am uniquely positioned to give you this advice. I was lucky enough to cook in a bunch of 2 and 3 Michelin star restaurants where I saw chefs at the top of their game. And I also developed and ran hundreds of workshops for thousands of home cooks where I taught them how to cook like culinary badasses. So listen closely for these 5 tips and methods that will instantly make you cook like a chef. There's even going to be one tip at the end where I think you can cook even better than a chef. So stay tuned for that one and let's jump right into it. Our first tip, this is the simplest one, the easiest to adopt, so listen closely. Add more salt. This is by far the #1 piece of advice that I have given to all of my students over the past couple of years. Now, some of you may be telling me, oh, I have high blood pressure or my food tastes plenty salty as it is. In that case, you're fine. If you have health conditions, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not your doctor, you do your thing. And if you think your food is salty enough to your taste, fantastic. You're like the 5% of people out there. But for those of you who think, oh, my food often tastes like it's missing something, it needs something extra, more salt is the answer. This really makes me think back to my first year in culinary school where our instructors drilled this into us. It became a meme. People got this tattooed to their arms. Salt brings out the flavor of everything that it touches. A little bit goes a long way, but for most savory applications, you can definitely add more. Especially if it's something starchy like mashed potatoes or pasta. Those things really mute salt. So don't be afraid to go a little bit extra. Now, I would bet money that most of you out there could easily add twice as much salt to the recipes that you're cooking, and the results would be amazing. But let's jump into tip #2, where I'll teach you how to use that salt. One of the more crucial things that you can do whilst you're cooking is to taste as you go. Now, I don't just mean simply grab a spoon, taste your food and go, yum, but I want you to process. I want you to think. I want you to be mindful about what you're putting in your mouth and what it needs. Is the flavor not loud enough? 90% of the time, it's just more salt. So we're going back to tip #1. But sometimes you'll experience that the flavors are very fatty and deep and luxurious and comforting, but kind of muted. That probably means you need a little bit more acid. And when I say acid, I really just mean like a few drops of lemon juice or a few drops of a nice vinegar. That's kind of all that it takes. In addition to that, maybe you want to add a little bit more fattiness, a little bit more mouthfeel, maybe a little bit of butter or olive oil could really help out with that. If something's a little bit bitter, a little bit harsh, a tiny amount of sweetener like honey or sugar could really help that out. Perhaps your dish is missing some depth or some additional flavor, and in that case it could make sense to add extra herbs and spices and things like that. But 90% of the time, you are looking at, does it need more salt? Does it need acid? Does it need something else to adjust one of the basic tastes? And once you have all of that right, then you can think about other ingredients to add because it's missing something. But usually when it's missing something, salt or acidity. But the only way to know that is by tasting as you go. Okay, our third tip. And this is something that I see a lot of home cooks hesitating with or treating with a lot of caution. Do not be afraid of high temperature cooking. Getting color on your food is getting flavor on your food. So what's the best way of high temperature cooking and browning your food? There's a couple steps here. Use a pan that can take on high temperatures, so things like Teflon or whatever. You can only get to like 260 degrees, which is pretty good, but if you really want high heat, use stainless steel or cast iron. You can check out my other video where I showed you the best pans to get. In addition to that, make sure you're using enough fat inside of the pan. You have preheated your pan well enough. You are not overcrowding your pan so that your ingredients aren't generating a lot of steam and things are able to brown a bunch. And don't move around your food super excessively, especially if it's something that spits out a bunch of water, like you're sauteing vegetables or something. By stepping away from the pan and just letting it do its thing, your food is going to cook. Obviously, it's going to cook. Your food is going to brown. Obviously, it's good to keep things moving and make sure they don't brown too fast. You are more than welcome to turn down the cooking. Chefs don't always blast things on 11 when they're cooking, although that sounds a lot like what they do in a busy service. But anyway, don't be afraid of high temperatures, don't be afraid of getting color on your food, and be mindful when it looks like you're steaming a bunch of ingredients inside of a pan instead of coloring them and browning them nicely. If you remember nothing else, high temperature is good, browning equals flavor, and sometimes touching less is cooking more. Okay, this next tip might not be an overnight change that you can instill, but if you change the way that you think about these things, you will improve significantly over time. And what I'd like you to do is to move slightly away from recipes that you follow rigidly and move more towards understanding techniques, learning about more ingredients, familiarizing yourself with more cooking rather than rigidly following some steps. Now, the easiest way that I've found to move away from recipes is to follow a recipe, but make a couple changes. So for example, if step one is just like sweat an onion, maybe I'll caramelize it because I want more flavor. Maybe I'll add some green peppers to that because they're in season at the moment and I have some really delicious ones. Maybe I'll replace the pork shoulder with chicken thighs in this recipe and make it more to my taste to serve for my diners. These are the kind of little changes that you can make over time to, number one, personalize recipes and make them feel more like they're your own, but also to not be so chained to a recipe. Another amazing change that you could make is not follow cooking times as rigidly, because sometimes they're kind of up in the air. Your stove may be hotter than the stove of the person who developed the recipe. So instead of saying, oh, the recipe says cook onions for 5 minutes, I've cooked my onions for 5 minutes, therefore they're perfect, start to cook more with your senses. Be like, okay, I need to get like nicely sweated onions. Maybe I want a little bit of caramelization around the outside. Take a look at them as you're cooking them and you're stirring them and see how they're moving along. If you step away from the food, use your senses more. If it smells like it's becoming sweet and amazing, then that probably means that it's a good point to check your pan. You don't need to be around it all the time. This is how chefs get to multitask a lot. They use a lot of their senses. They'll hear a really high sizzle inside of the pan. They'll smell their food cooking or overcooking or not be quite cooked yet. Depend less on recipes and more on your senses, more on your intuition, and more on your inherent knowledge. Obviously, you're going to need to build that up over time, but start thinking about it from now. Tip number 5 is great advice for anybody to be more like a chef and not just home cooks, and that is to be more organized. Now that sounds quite vague. What am I talking about exactly? Number one, obviously you want to keep your kitchen organized and stocked, and that's perfectly great. Actually made another video on that subject if you'd like to check that out. But I also mean in the way that you go into prepping food. So let's say you only have 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get a meal together in the evening, you're tight on time, you walk into the kitchen like a bull in a china shop. You're grabbing pans, you're grabbing your ingredients, you start chopping something, you start cooking something else. Now you're saving time by jumping straight into the cooking, but if you stop, take 2 minutes, see, okay, I need to make dinner. I need to marinate some beef. Okay, that should probably happen first. I'll roast the potatoes next because those will take some time in the oven. I'm going to prepare a salad and a vinaigrette because that's quite quick and easy to do. And finally, I'm going to cook the beef at around the same time that I'm pulling the potatoes out. That little bit of organization, even for a simple meal, will make your life so much better. Spend the first couple minutes going over what you need to be done, in what order, get your board out, get a knife out, get your ingredients laid out in the order that you're going to need them, maybe a couple containers to put your mise en place in. That's fancy chef speak for your prep and ingredients. These little steps, by taking those 2 to 5 minutes in the beginning of your cooking time, you're going to set yourself up for success amazingly well. It's going to be way less chaotic inside of the kitchen, and you may think, oh shit, I'm tight on time, I need to push, I need to move, I need to whatever. Calm down. Some of the fastest people I have seen in the kitchen are the ones that when you look at them, it's like, damn, he's barely moving. Like, this guy's going so slow. How is he going to finish his prep list? And then this guy is one of the first ones like twiddling his thumbs in the beginning of service, being like, hey, I'm done with my prep. Because they are organized, because they are mentally prepared for what they need to do. If you've got more foods to prepare for and organize, even if it's just meal prep for the week, or if it's like a big holiday event like Christmas or something, I would highly recommend writing like a proper prep list and a to-do list, seeing what days you need to prepare what items, when you need to do the shopping. This sort of like organization will not only reduce the amount of stress that you go through to prepare these meals, but it'll make it more enjoyable and keep you sort of like on track of things. Keep that in mind. Like even something like this. This was my simple prep list for like making that pumpkin video a couple of weeks ago, which nobody has seen, by the way. So please go check that out at some point. But yeah, it was just like stuff to keep me accountable, see what order I need to do things, check things off. Like halfway through, I kind of knew what I needed to do, so I stopped referencing it. But it was really great to allow me to manage my time and what I was doing that day. And so for our last tip, this is honestly a little bit more of a tip for chefs that they could learn from home cooks that we often forget, and that is to cook with love. If you're a chef, it's a busy Saturday night, you've got like 20 orders on the board, you're green on 5 of them, like you are cooking fast. You obviously want things to be as good as possible, but you're pushing food out. In comparison, maybe like a week ago, I was making a plate of carbonara and I wanted to get the sauce absolutely perfect. Now you can cook a carbonara in more or less the time it takes to cook some pasta. After the pasta was cooked, I spent a good 5, if not more, minutes just nursing the sauce, making sure that it was thickening just enough, there was just enough heat to get that perfect creamy texture, that perfect creamy consistency, that it was like, it wasn't liquidy or loose, and it was just one of the best plates of carbonara that I've made in a while. Don't lose that as a home cook. Chefs will cook with fear and anxiety and ego and this desire to be the best, which can produce really great results if they're talented enough. But so many of the best meals that I've had in my life have come from not necessarily the most talented cooks, but the people who put the most love in their food. So if you learn nothing else today, don't stop cooking with love. And add more salt.